Hello and welcome. In this video I will be showing you how to enable and use Windows Hyper-V for Windows 10 Pro and Windows Server 2022. As someone in the comments of my last tutorial video asked about setting up virtualization for their home server, I have decided to make a video tutorial about Hyper-V for anyone who would like to set up virtualization for their home server. Windows Hyper-V is a software that is able to section off your computer or server into multiple virtual computers so that you can run multiple operating systems simultaneously. Please note that this is not like having two computers, as it takes resources from the host operating system, which will be Windows, and allocates it to guest operating systems so that they can use the resources. It's like having a computer as an app on your computer that can run operating systems inside of it. To use Windows Hyper-V, you will need a machine with at least 8 GB of memory. As you can see, this one does have 8 GB of memory. It will also need a 64-bit CPU, which you can find information on by going into Settings, System, About. You can see here 64-bit operating system, x64 based processor. This is what you need. You will also need a wired Ethernet connection, as Hyper-V creates a virtual switch for all of your virtual machines to connect to the network with. You will also need to make sure that you have virtualization enabled in your computer's BIOS, as this will allow Hyper-V to allocate CPU cores to the virtual machines so that they can use them. If the host operating system is doing something that is using all of the CPU, this may affect the guest operating system's performance as well. To install Hyper-V onto Windows Server 2022, you can come down here to the Start menu and click on Server Manager. When Server Manager loads, you're able to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features, skip this page, and you want to select Role-Based or Feature-Based Installation. Then you want to click Next, and you want to select your server, which if you have just set up Windows Server, it will be the only one in the list. Then you want to scroll down on the list of roles to Hyper-V, and you want to check this box and click Add Features. Now, as I already have Hyper-V installed on my machine, I cannot show you the install process, but after you have checked the box, clicked Add Features, Next, and all the things, it will download Hyper-V, then prompt you to restart your computer. After you have restarted your computer, you will be able to go to the Start menu and open up Hyper-V Manager. Now for Windows 10, you can go here and search. You can go to the search bar and search Turn Windows Features on or off, and scroll down until you see Hyper-V, and check that box and then click OK, and it will install and prompt you to restart. And now, no matter what operating system you're on, whether it be Server or Windows 10 Pro, you will be able to open the Hyper-V Manager application, which allows you to manage the virtual machines that you can create. So the first thing you want to do when you open up Hyper-V Manager is go to the Virtual Switch Manager, which will allow you to create a virtual switch. So you'll want to create a switch, we'll call it Switch 1, and you will make it an external network and select your Ethernet adapter and allow Management Operating System to share this network adapter. The Management Operating System is your host, which is running Hyper-V. To create a new virtual machine, you can come here and click New Virtual Machine. Click Next. You can name the virtual machine, so we can call it Virtual Machine 1, and it lets you browse where you want to put it. So you can put it on the C drive, another drive, or a USB drive. Now I would recommend, if you are using a USB drive, that it is a SATA drive that is using a USB to SATA adapter, as USB sticks don't have very high quality NAND, and the virtual machine will use this as its boot drive. Here, create a new folder, VMs, we can select folder. So this means the virtual machine will be stored in DVM's Virtual Machine 1. It uses the name as a subfolder in this folder here. Click Next, and here you can select Generation 1 or Generation 2. Think of it like Generation 1 as legacy boot and Generation 2 as EFI or UEFI boot. If you are installing Windows 10 or Windows Server 2019 or 2022 or Windows 11, you will want to select Generation 2 as it enables a bunch of secure boot features and it is designed for the latest versions of Windows. If you are installing something like Linux or TrueNAS or any other operating system that doesn't specify what boot it supports, you will want to select Generation 1. Some other operating systems though will say they require UEFI based firmware, and that's when you select Generation 2. So we are going to be installing a Windows 10 Pro virtual machine in Windows Server 2022. So we'll click Generation 2. Here you will select the amount of memory that will be allocated to the virtual machine. Now for Windows to run smoothly, you will need 4 GB of RAM, and this is why 8 GB of RAM is necessary for your host system, as it will take 4 GB away from the host. So you're going to have 2 Windows installs with 4 gigs each after you do this, if you have 8. And you can also enable dynamic memory for a virtual machine. Now if the virtual machine is Windows, it is able to communicate with Hyper-V to tell it, only take the amount of RAM I need from the host, rather than allocating the full 4 gigs to me all at once. So if you have multiple virtual machines where one of them may need a lot of RAM at midday, but maybe at midnight a different virtual machine needs a lot of RAM, then you can enable dynamic memory for it to allocate memory. But I'm going to disable this as this machine has enough RAM to support this machine. You'll want to select switch 1 because that is the switch you have created for your virtual machines to connect to each other with. For some reason default switch just doesn't work for me, so I made switch 1. Here is where you can name the drive for your virtual machine. I'm going to leave it as it is. And this 127 gigabytes, it does not allocate it all at once, but it will allow this file to grow to 127 gigabytes, as this file is like a virtual drive. This file represents the boot drive of the virtual machine. So I'm going to click next. Install an operating system from a bootable image file. After you have selected your ISO file, click next, and it will tell you what the virtual machine will be made up of, and then you can click finish. So once you have created your virtual machine, you will want to go to settings and go to processor. You'll want to increase the number of virtual processors until the percent total of system resources is 100. Now you can lower this to 50 to allow the virtual machine to only use half of your CPU if the virtual machine is going to be running a constant task that is always going to be taking up CPU. But just to make it run faster when it needs to, we'll put it at 100. Next we'll go to firmware, and we will want to move network adapter down to the bottom, because we don't want to network boot it. We want it to boot from a hard drive and a DVD drive. The DVD drive is what we will use to install Windows, and then once that is done it will continue booting from the virtual drive we install Windows on in the future. Now if you go down to checkpoints, what I like to do is I like to disable this, because if you have a virtual machine that has a lot of data on it, then checkpoints will make the virtual machine do a lot of host disk operations before the virtual machine is allowed to start up. It will basically create a copy of the entire virtual disk before it starts up each time, so that if you do mess up your virtual machine you can go back in time to where it was working. But if you just keep good backups, you don't need checkpoints and it's a bit quicker. If you want the virtual machine to start up automatically with Windows, you can make it always start this virtual machine automatically, but leaving it on automatically start if it was running when the computer shut down, it's perfectly fine. automatic stop action. The best option for this is save the virtual machine state, as shut down the guest operating system only works if the guest operating system supports power button presses to turn it off. If you select this with something like Linux, or if you select shutdown with a specific version of Linux that doesn't support being turned off by pressing a power button, then it won't shut down and the virtual machine will just hang and everything will go upside down. And don't select turn off, because that's like pulling the power cable out of a computer, and you don't want to do that. So we'll leave it on save, click apply and click OK. Now we are able to right click on it and click connect. Now this window will appear. This is the application type thing. This is like a window into this virtual computer, and you can click start and it will connect, and you'll want to press a key to boot from the CD or DVD, because that's what we have our Windows 10 installation disk on. And we can just see we've got the Windows 10 install set up here. We can just click install now after setting our language, and this, from now on, you can do whatever you want. You can do any sort of operating systems. You could install Linux, or you could install TrueNAS, because now Hyper-V is ready. You can create any machines, but I would make sure you name them different names, because in the folder of VMs you will see the name is a machine folder, and all the virtual hard disks for that machine are in this folder. So if you want to keep your machines separate, I recommend naming them different things. If you name them the same thing, then it may have an issue with the virtual disk, but there shouldn't be an issue with the actual files associated with the configuration, because they have these weird randomized names. We select our virtual disk to install Windows 2. Any operating system should be able to see the virtual disks, but for an operating system such as TrueNAS that requires quite bare metal access to the disks, I would not recommend doing this. What I would recommend for something that requires bare metal access to a disk is to go here into settings and go into your storage controller and click add and select a physical disk. To allow Hyper-V to select a physical disk, you will need to go to disk management, and you will need to offline the drive. Now, depending on how your computer sees the drive, it might not work, because Windows is Windows and sometimes it doesn't work. But most of the time you'll be able to offline the disk and it should show up in that menu for you to use as a physical disk for your virtual machine. Now if we restart now, the boot order will now boot into the virtual disk that we have created, and it will go on with the Windows install process. So while that is going in the background, I can close this because it's still running in the background of the system. So now we are going to install Linux. If you want to know how to do that, it's slightly different. We can name this Virtual Machine 2. You don't have to make these virtual machines, you can make any virtual machines you want. I'm just showing you how to do it so that if you do want to install Ubuntu, then this is how you would do it and how it's slightly different. You want to select generation 1 as Ubuntu. I don't think it supports UEFI, but it might do, I'm not sure. I always do it with generation 1 and it's worked fine for me. Again, going to give it 4 GB of memory. As this is not a Windows guest operating system, the dynamic memory won't work anyway, so we might as well uncheck it. We'll also connect it to switch 1, and we will also leave all these settings as they are, because it's the default, which usually works. Now when you select generation 1, you're able to insert a virtual floppy disk, but we're not going to do that. We're going to use an image file. because that's what DVDs and CDs are for. Let's install Ubuntu Desktop while that's cooking, because why not? Right, okay, we have selected ISO, which is Ubuntu Desktop, and finish. Now if we go into here, we go into settings, make sure it boots from IDE, then CD, then floppy, then legacy network adapter. Make sure that the processor is at 100 because I like my virtual machines to go quickly, and disable checkpoints because I don't like them. But if you want checkpoints, you can enable them. It's just when I first started using Hyper-V, I realized my machines weren't starting up when I asked them to. They were starting up like 20 minutes afterwards. I figured out it's because checkpoints was trying to copy the disk. So if we connect to this machine and click start, it should boot into Ubuntu. And as you can see, we are able to run a host operating system which is running this software, Ubuntu, and Windows at the same time. And these act like different computers. Hello, Windows. Now, as you can see, this does take up a lot of CPU, but if you enable the show kernel times, you will be able to distinguish between host operating system use and virtual machine operating system use, as the kernel times will actually be the virtualized CPU resources. Now you can see it doesn't show up in the list of apps as an app, but that's because it's not an app, it's other computers that your host isn't monitoring. It's Hyper-V that's monitoring it. This is something that is very useful in Hyper-V. If it detects that the guest operating system is Windows, you're actually able to select what resolution you want it to be, and then you can connect to that in the resolution of your display. So now this is a new Windows 10 virtual machine that is running under Hyper-V, and it looks exactly like a completely normal Windows installation, and it's running extremely smoothly. The only thing is, it's probably still updating things in the background. Here we go. We have a virtual machine that is completely functional, looks exactly like a normal system. It's got all the apps, everything. And when you shut it down, it just disappears. And there we go. Right, let's continue with Ubuntu. Normal installation, download updates. Continue, erase disk, and install Ubuntu. This will only erase the virtual disk. It won't delete the virtual disk file, because this file here is like the representation of a physical hard drive, but it's not, it's a virtual hard drive, that's why it's a file. But to us, this file is a hard drive. So when this says erase disk, it will not delete everything on your disk. It will delete everything inside this drive. So don't worry, it's only if you're using a disk that you've used somewhere else, you'd want to select something else. So you'll enter your name, Tom, and it will create your computer's name, Tom Virtual Machine, pick a username and pick a password, and it will install the system as it normally would if you were just installing Linux normally. Guest operating systems can detect they're running in a virtual machine. It usually does not impact how the guest operating system functions, as it's able to talk to the processor as it normally would, because Hyper-V Manager has given it some processor bits to work with. Right, now the installation has complete, we can restart, and it should restart from the IDE. Now it doesn't matter that that's IDE, because it should just, work. It's a storage device, it should just work, unless that the guest operating system specifically says warning, it does not support IDE. Now, one note is if you're running Home Assistant, which is a home automation operating system, then you will probably want to virtualize that, as that's all it does. But it does a lot in that space. And what you are able to do with it is enable Generation 2 virtual machines. And that is required for the installation, as Home Assistant does require UEFI in Hyper-V, as it says on the installation guide on their website. If you're not sure what a guest operating system needs, then you should check documentation on how to install it. And if they do have a section for virtualization software, then follow that one rather than bare metal installation, because sometimes virtualization can be slightly different. And we can skip this. Next. Done. Now we have Ubuntu running on Windows, because who doesn't want to confuse people? No, it's not confusing, it's just so that you can use both at the same time. It is also worth mentioning that these virtual machines cannot use GPUs unless you set up GPU pass-through, which is something I don't want to go into because I don't know how it works and I don't really need to use it myself. There are other tutorials on YouTube on how to do it. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching this video on how to install Hyper-V onto Windows 10, and I hope that it worked for you. If you have any questions, put it down in the comments, and hopefully Hyper-V is completely functional and working for you.